This video was brought to you by Skillshare. Late on Wednesday evening, a contingent of the Niger military, led by Colonel Amadou Adramani, describing themselves as the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, took to the country's national television to announce that they had, quote, decided to put an end to the regime that you know due to the deteriorating security situation and bad governance. The soldiers then announced that they closed Niger's borders in order to protect against foreign interference, as well as suspending all public institutions. They also insisted that the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum was, quote, safe and well, but gave no details as to his whereabouts. Now, this move was quickly denounced as a coup by the international community, and even by other parts of the Niger military, who threatened to attack the coupists unless they stepped down. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what's happening in Niger, what might happen next, and why this is pretty terrible news for a country and a region beset by political instability. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. To understand what happened this week and why, it's important to look at the context. Niger, a large landlocked country in West Africa, has had a somewhat turbulent time since gaining independence from France in 1960. Given Niger's position as a former French colony, it's long maintained close ties with France, particularly in relation to security and economics. Alongside this bilateral relationship, Niger has also developed and maintained strong ties with the European Union and the United States. Western countries have good reasons to desire positive relations with Niger. For starters, Niger is rich with natural resources and is one of the largest reserves of uranium anywhere in the world. Additionally, the country is situated in the Sahel region, which is an area on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert that stretches right across the African continent. Now, in recent years, this has become an increasingly unstable area and has been racked by violence amid an insurgency by groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the so-called Islamic State. And importantly, Niger has proven pivotal in Western efforts to suppress this insurgency. As part of this effort, the US has a drone base in the country and has provided training and material support for Nigerian forces. While at the same time, the French presence in the country has grown in recent years too. After the military junta in neighboring Mali ordered French troops to leave in 2022, and the same thing happened in Burkina Faso in 2023, France has shifted its base of anti-insurgency operations in the region across the border into Niger. And just earlier this year, the European Union launched a military partnership mission in Mali to, quote, enhance the ability of the Niger armed forces to contain the terrorist threat and protect the population. However, as a wave of instability has swept across the Sahel, partly caused by rising food and debt servicing costs, Russia has supplanted the West in the region. Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and Sudan have all seen coups relatively recently, usually involving a pro-Western or in particular pro-France government being replaced by a new anti-Western administration, which then needs a new security guarantor, and Russia is the obvious non-Western choice. Often represented by the Wagner Group, Russia has already stepped up its presence in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Libya. And if this week's coup is successful, Niger could be the next on the list. Bazoum was a staunch ally of the West, but this is something he was regularly criticized for by the opposition, and his successor is unlikely to hold similar views. In an interview with the Financial Times in May, Bazoum even acknowledged the anti-French sentiment common in the Sahel region, where many young people see France as a neo-colonial power, and admitted that, quote, French policy in Africa is not a great success right now. Ironically, in that same interview, Bazoum claimed that there was zero chance of a military takeover. Now, that clearly wasn't quite true, but at the time of writing, it still isn't clear whether this coup has been successful. On Wednesday morning, military officials detained Bazoum at the presidential palace before announcing the coup on national television late on Wednesday evening. However, there are currently pro-Bazoum protests going on in the capital, and the office of the Nigerian presidency warned on Twitter that the military was, quote, standing ready to attack the elements behind the mutiny if they did not relent. Nonetheless, the fact that, well, the military haven't attacked doesn't bode well for Bazoum. All in all, this is pretty terrible news for a country and a region that's been beset by political instability. Niger itself has suffered 4 coups since its independence from France in 1960, and numerous other attempts. Nonetheless, there was a moment of optimism when Bazoum, previously an interior minister, took over the presidency in 2021. Now, Bazoum took over from Mohamed Issoufou, a grandee of Niger politics who had been prime minister for a brief stint in the 90s before a spat between him and the president at the time gave the military an excuse to stage a coup in 1996. Niger then returned to a democracy after another coup in 1999, but the newly elected president tried to change the constitution to keep himself in power indefinitely after his 2 terms, which triggered yet another coup in 2010. Issoufou was then elected as president in 2011 and again in 2016. But unlike his predecessors, he voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms. Bazoum, a close ally of Issoufou, then won in the 2021 presidential election, eking out a narrow victory against Mahamadou Ousmane, the same guy who'd been the president in the 90s when Issoufou was prime minister. Now, this tight result sparked 3 days' worth of protests by Ousmane's supporters, but Niger's security services were able to quell these protests with relatively little upset. And after the results were confirmed by Niger's constitutional court in April 2021, Issoufou formally handed over power to Bazoum, marking Niger's first successful and peaceful democratic transition. And it wasn't just this sparking optimism. It also looked like Niger's security services had finally got a handle on the military. Now, this most recent coup is actually the 3rd attempt on Bazoum since he came to power a couple of years ago. But the security services were able to snub out the other 2 attempts with relatively little fuss, and they barely made the headlines. There was the attempted coup before Bazoum's inauguration in 2021, resulting in the arrest of several pilots, and another in March of this year while Bazoum was visiting Turkey, resulting in a single arrest. But unfortunately for Bazoum, the same thing didn't happen this time round. And unless this current coup is snuffed out soon too, Niger looks likely to collapse back into a military dictatorship, reversing all of the progress which has been made over the past 15 years. Now, that all depends on what happens over the next couple of days, so be sure to keep paying attention to find out what happens next. In fact, that's probably not a bad idea more generally. Things are always changing, and it feels great to stay on top of them as they do. Even within TLDR, I've recently shifted my video editing workflow from Final Cut to Premiere in order to better integrate with the Adobe products our growing team of editors prefer. Now, when I started with YouTube, I just messed around and taught myself Final Cut. But this time round, at the advice of my team, I headed over to Skillshare to take their course on the topic. Unlike when I taught myself the first time round, I was guided through the process quickly and efficiently, and barely lost any productivity as I shifted from one tool to the other. It's not just that either. You likely already knew that Skillshare had classes for things like photography, editing, and illustration, but Skillshare also has hundreds of career-focused classes too. Now, we all know at this stage that traditional jobs aren't one size fits all. I mean, I quit my full-time job in marketing so that I could take more control and do YouTube full-time. Now, that's not necessarily the path that you want to take too, but the courses on Skillshare can help you design a career that fits you. That's courses on everything from how to start a business, growing in e-commerce, how to maximize your workflow, or the course I'm taking right now on how to build a business that lasts. And if that sounds interesting, you should use our link in the description, which gives you access to all of that for free. That's right, the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So check it out, and thanks for supporting the channel.